Lots of people die in 5 Points every day. The only thing this godforsaken colony doesn't lack for is population. Most of those deaths are by natural causes. They're not my concern. A big percentage of those bodies are murders, but they're still not my problem. Sure, the police get called. Only then we find out that the victims had it coming. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Every now and then, word will come down from on high that a particular death was for the good of the colony, and it's best if no questions are asked. When that happens, my fellow detectives close the case, send the body to the recyclers, and enjoy the extra money that materializes in their accounts afterwards. Turns out, this city has an astronomically high suicide rate. Go figure. But whenever there's a killing that wasn't sanctioned by the powers above or below, those are my cases. For most of the crimes here, there's no point in investigating because we already know who did it, but there's nothing we can do about it. They're untouchable. It's when the rogue predators step out of line and hurt regular citizens that it becomes my problem. Solving those murders is what they keep me around for. Zenith Sector 15 was home to the stockyard. The name was ironic, since the only living cows on the planet were in the zoo on Olympus. I'd been to that zoo once as a kid on a school field trip. I remember a bunch of the poor kids from Zenith had gotten to take the sky bridge up to the tallest mountain to see how the rich folks lived. There had been 2 of the black and white ones there. I vaguely remember cows being big and silly looking in person. The stockyard got its name because it was home to Zenith's protein vat. I'd been here once before, but for a murder case rather than a field trip. A couple of years ago, one of the workers had lost his mind and beaten his foreman to death with a wrench. The factory hadn't changed much since then. It was just a big cave filled with giant stainless steel tanks, one of which had been blocked off with yellow tape. On one side of the tape were a bunch of curious workers. On the other side were the police. Since I saw that a couple detectives were on top of the tank and the hatch was open, I could already tell it was going to be one of those days. There was a constable guarding the ladder. I'd never met him before, and I only wore my uniform to official functions and funerals, so I flashed my creds as I approached. DCI Lutero Cade. Oh, the young man seemed surprised, but he did take the time to actually scan my badge to make sure it was legit. I've heard of you. He still appeared fit, like he hadn't stopped caring about department standards yet, and his body armor didn't have too many patched holes or bloodstains on it, which marked him as a rookie. What have you heard about me, Constable? Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. It's just that everybody has a rep. Nah, it's okay. I'm just curious what mine is now around here. The kid seemed a little embarrassed. Well, that if the department calls you out, then it's the real deal. I mean, a real investigation. Not just another cleanup crew. He sounded excited by the prospect. It's always real. The stockyard might not have had any actual cows, but there was some unidentifiable stink lingering. It kind of reminded me of burnt hair. They just let us out of our box once in a while for the fresh air. Whatever you say, Detective. His tone indicated the other officers who shared my title didn't get a lot of respect from the rank and file. It's just that we see a lot of problems in this sector, but we don't get to do much about stopping them, if you get my meaning. It was perfectly clear these guys processed a lot of crime scenes, but rarely got any payback against the evil men who created them. I hear you. He lifted the crime scene tape for me to duck under. It was kind of sad. The ZPD had sunk so far that even the new kids came out of the academy jaded. It had taken me a long time to destroy my hopes and dreams that much. What's your name, Constable? The lowly uniforms didn't get name tags, just numbers. It made it harder for Zenith's nut jobs to make their interactions personal. There was nothing quite as charming as having some psycho show up at your home, hungry for retribution. Katanga, sir. A word of advice. Constable Katanga, you're right about one thing. Everybody gets a reputation, like lowly constables who've got strong opinions about how things ought to be. Life's not easy for those who rock the boat. There wasn't a boat on this entire planet, as far as I knew, so the rookie just gave me a confused look. Then he figured out the old Earth idiom. I suppose you'd know how that is better than anyone, sir. Yeah, guess I do. I like this one. Go get me a coffee. I climbed up the ladder and found 3 people on top of the tank. From the coveralls, one was a stockyard supervisor. The other 2 were dressed like me, in what would be considered zenith business casual, meaning respectable and you can conceal a gun under it, but nothing that you wouldn't mind getting dirt or blood on. The 2 crouched over the hatch were detectives from the 5th 10th. One of them recognized me. Damn it, HQ sent Cade. Hey, Sam, I'd worked with D. Samantha Grady before. I'd describe her as competent when she felt like it. Happy to see you, Lutero. That was obviously a lie. No detective was ever happy when I showed up. I was the ZPD's official ender of happiness. If I was there, it meant they might actually have to work for a living. Grady and her partner stood to greet me. They were already gloved up, so there were no offers of handshakes. D.I. Boria, this is DCI Lutero Cade. He only shows up when it's messy or complicated. By that, she meant that her corporate overlords wouldn't be bribing her to look the other way on this one. Just lucky, I guess, when your bot scanned this Vic and got a facial ID, it popped up at headquarters. He's flagged. Why? Asked Boria, who was a squint-eyed slab of a man with no neck. I don't know yet, but the superintendent was curious enough to send me. What have you got? Sam Grady gestured toward the hatch. See for yourself. I squatted next to the hole. Hot, moist air was wafting out. The metal was warm to the touch. They'd sent a crime scene bot into the tank to scan for evidence, and it was hovering over the body to provide illumination. Our victim was about 2 meters down, partially submerged in a semi-translucent pink sludge. What flavor is this gonna be? I asked the foreman. This one is grown from pork DNA. That's chicken over there, and beef is in the red tank. We've got 0 tolerance for corpses in our meats. It was good to know that the foreman was a man who took pride in his craft. Since we all live off this stuff, Boria asked, what the hell is that awful smell? Don't worry, detective, that ain't the meats. We keep the food vats real sanitary. I mean, come on, we feed this stuff to our kids too. But we've also got specialized vats for growing hide, hair, and keratin. That's hooves and horns. Basically, but it's got all sorts of industrial uses. What you're smelling is from the chop saws harvesting the top layers off. This was turning out to be quite the educational field trip after all. The sludge they were growing sure looked a lot more palatable once it was in a conveniently packaged flavored loaf. There was an old saying on Earth, I noted. Whoever likes law or sausage should never watch how either is made. The foreman asked. Never mind. The corpse was face up, and I could see that he was a white male, probably mid-30s, large of stature, and if I had to make a wild guess as to the cause of death, it would be the bullet hole in his forehead. Since he was covered in slime, it was hard to tell how long he'd been in the tank. Who found him? We got an alarm that one of the outtake pipes was clogged. If they'd taken off his shoes and belt and then cut him into more manageable pieces first, poor guy would have dissolved, and we never even would have known he was in there. The way the foreman said that made me think that sort of thing had happened before, but I was afraid to ask. Not that I'd go so far as to become a vegetarian or anything. I'd seen the mushroom farms in Sector 14, and they were far nastier than this. Any witnesses, cameras, security bots, nobody saw nothing. Bots on all the entrances, but no record of this guy coming into the stockyard. Cameras all over, but the one watching this hatch went down a month ago. We've been meaning to fix it. The hatch is alarmed too, but it didn't go off, so it must be broken. Well, knowing that the protein supply for hundreds of thousands of people is so easily tampered with will sure help me sleep well at night," said D. Grady. If she thought this was bad, she'd obviously never seen how our water was processed or the sorry state of the scrubbers that filtered our air. That was one of the downsides of being the detective chief inspector for the poorest of the 5 points. I got to see just how ragged our little system really was. We were a colony that wasn't supposed to exist to begin with. The fact we'd survived well over a century on our own, cut off from the rest of humanity in this inhospitable place, was frankly a miracle. "We've got dozens of tanks, lady," the foreman said. "And we test every batch for safety before it gets shipped out for processing. In other words, give it a few days, and this guy would have just been more porcine-flavored protein, and nobody would have noticed." I couldn't blame the foreman for getting indignant. It was pretty much guaranteed the stockyard had more integrity in its dealings than the ZPD. D. Grady didn't mean any offense. "I'll need to see all your footage, every single camera and sensor. Then I'm gonna want all your employee records. We've got hundreds of employees on the night shift alone. And you got any idea how far behind production schedule we're going to be after I have to dump 40,000 liters of perfectly good meat just cause it's got one dead guy floating in it? Doesn't matter. I'll give you a list of who I want to talk to, and you'll make time, or I'll make your life uncomfortable. Your call. You can go ahead and get that started for me. We'll be down in a minute." The foreman clearly didn't like being bossed around in his little kingdom, but he left. I waited until he was out of earshot before asking the other detectives, "What do you think?" "Suicide," Boria suggested. "He got depressed and climbed in the tank. Now, that was just lazy thinking. Did you miss the gunshot wound to the head? He got in, then shot himself, between the eyes?" I asked, incredulous. But then again, the 15th had once declared somebody who had gotten stabbed 20 times in the back as a suicide, so anything was possible. "I bet when they drain the tank, we'll find a gun sitting on the bottom," Boria added. As much as the ZPD was encouraged to dismiss all our murders as suicides, the fact of the matter was that our entire city sat on top of a mountain chain, several thousand meters above a perpetually roiling caustic acid atmosphere. Our real jumpers tended to leap into the ever-beckoning mystery clouds, not a vat of meat soup to slow-cook themselves to death. "Grady," I asked, hoping this was one of those times she felt like putting her brains to use. "Somebody shot him, then put his body in here to dispose of it. We're deep in the interior of the mountain, so this was probably more convenient than carrying him all the way outside to chuck him off a cliff. They figured he'd break down into his component bits, and there goes any evidence." I nodded, because that wasn't a bad hypothesis. "Close, only I don't think they killed him first." Grady looked around and realized the same thing I already had. Our Vic was obviously heavy, nearly as big as I was, and the only way to access this top hatch required climbing up 10 meters of ladder. Unless the body had been carried up here by a renegade workbot, odds were he'd come up here under his own power and then been executed. From the lack of blood on the catwalk, they'd probably made him get in the tank and then shot him while he treaded pork juice. "Brutal," she said. "More merciful than letting him drown in it, I suppose." I activated one of the bots and sent it to scan the top of the tank for blood. Spatter, powder flecks, or traces of DNA. Then I saw that I'd gotten a message from HQ. I checked my display and saw that they had sent me our victim's records. So that's why they called me out. He's a cop. All of a sudden, the tank we were standing on top of seemed a lot more symbolic a dumping ground than accidental. "One of ours?" Grady asked. "Worse. He's from Mount Olympus. The 5 points are from highest to lowest: Olympus, Kailash, Sinai, Cotopaxi, and Zenith. Those are the 5 peaks of the tallest mountain range, which happens to be the only inhabitable area of our entire planet. Croatoan is a nasty bitch of a world, 6 to 20,000 meters above sea level. The atmosphere is an oxygen and nitrogen mix that's breathable without too much processing. Go below 6,000 and you're fucking dead. The rest of the surface is covered in an endless acid fog bank that is instantly lethal to humans. What's below that level? Nobody knows. Probes don't last long in those hungry clouds. The bots mankind sent to the surface transmitted back some confusing readings and weird video, and then melted. We stay above the clouds, and the planet lets us live. Croatoan is cruel like that. We've got us a love-hate relationship. This one patch of mountain range is our home and has been for generations. In that time, we've covered most of it with gleaming city, its 5 hollowed-out mountains connected by sky bridges, the galaxy's most ambitious anthill. Olympus is the top part of the range. Mount Zenith is at the bottom. The most important thing to remember about this arrangement is that shit rolls downhill. While the stockyard workers drained the tank and fished out the floater, I went through the VIX file. Devin Rutter had been an inspector at Olympus PD, assigned to the Special Magistrate's office. We didn't have an equivalent in Zenith, so I wasn't sure what their duties entailed. They probably protected the golf course or polished all the golden fountains, or whatever it was the snoots did up there. I had Grady and Borgia put their cadre of bots to work, scanning and mapping the area and taking statements. They were happy to leave the rest of this mess to me. I couldn't blame them. This case had all the warning signs of an impending clusterfuck. OPD inspectors didn't come down to Zenith to slum it for kicks. We were from the same planet, but entirely different worlds. Olympus was home of the Cabal, and OPD were basically their gophers. That meant Rutter must have had important reasons to be here. Important reasons meant important people were involved, and important people were the lastish holes you wanted to piss off. Constable Katanga brought me a coffee as requested. It's from the foreman's office, but I don't think he's spitting it. That's nice of him. I sipped the bitter mixture. I don't know if this was what our ancestors would have thought of as coffee, but the genetically modified beans were packed with caffeine and vitamin D and grew like crazy in the wine-sheltered crevasses of Cotopaxi. Is this your beat, Katanga? Yeah, local too. I'm 5th 10th Sector North born and bred. That was a rough neighborhood. How long you been on the job? 6 months. But they've been busy. The kid was obviously fishing for work. I've been in one shooting, put him down clean. Rolled in the clear, that wasn't saying too much. ZPD was home to the bi-weekly gunfight, and to avoid confusion, around here, by bi-weekly, we meant twice a week, not every other week like they do on some other dumb rocks, but I knew why he was telling me that. Most of the suspects I ended up dealing with weren't the come-along quietly type. I didn't get to testify in many trials. 6 months. Shouldn't you still have a training officer? Katanga shrugged. On my 3rd day at work, my Tio got stabbed in the neck by an angry pimp. He's still off on medical leave. They've not got around to replacing him yet. Self-taught overachievers were nothing but trouble. Ask me how I know. You looking for a new assignment? With you? Yes, sir, I am. Doing what I do hasn't exactly made me popular. So why? Katanga shrugged. Do reasons matter? They do to me. I hate killers. Then you were born on the wrong mountain, my friend. Life's cheap here. No, I mean the rondos, the psychos. Not business. I'm not some naive idealist. I know how the world works, but the ones who break the order of things, murdering folks because their feelings got hurt, or for no reason at all, fuck those ish holes. They need to go down. Sounds personal. Those are my reasons. Take it or leave it, detective. You're supposed to be the best at catching those types. I could use the extra manpower. So I let his attitude slide. No bullshit assessment time. You're either useful to me or you're not. Who runs this sector? The councilman is. Don't waste my time with the officials, kid. I mean, who really runs it? Who's buying the politicians, high side and low side? Top biggest corp in the 5/10th is OC, Omnicrotoan, the company doing the deep dig. Yeah, they own the stockyard and the water treatment plant here. They've locked up the sector's official news and social media too, so it says whatever they want it to say, but they're not very smooth about it, so most folks don't listen to them. On the low, the constable paused to roll up one of his sleeves and show me his tats. There was an evil cartoon monkey brandishing a pair of swords on his forearm. Badoon clan runs things here. You grew up in the interior, you were in a gang, period. We all had a sleeve like Katanga's, consider it a resume. And I knew what all the symbols meant. The stars meant Katanga had done some minor crimes for the Badoon clan, and the upward pointing knife meant he'd stood tall in some turf fights. But no. Skulls or bullets meant he'd never killed anyone on the clan's behalf. The ink was faded, no new additions in years. You still affiliated? We're on speaking terms, but I don't run with them anymore. Difference of opinion? Something like that. Katanga obviously didn't want to elaborate. There was no shortage of ways to fall out with the criminal syndicate, which inevitably controlled your sector. Since he was still alive, it couldn't be anything too bad. Good enough. I can still get you a meeting with the local street boss if you want. Do it. That mean I'm reassigned? Temporarily. Welcome to homicide. Constable. I took another drink and then went back to reading the file. For future reference, I take my coffee with 2 sugars. What are you waiting for? Arrange that meet. Katanga nodded and then actually started to jog for the exit. That much enthusiasm was disgusting. You might be asking yourself, why in the world would humans ever try to settle a shit-tier planet like Crotoan when there are so many better ones out there? Good question. The answer is by accident. I'm not a scientist. My knowledge of science begins and ends with crime scene analysis, so take this with a grain of salt. The way I understand it, back in those days, survey companies would pick a system with exoplanets, then use one of the gates to skip a little probe across vast reaches of space to get there fast. If the probe found something habitable, it would then build a tiny one-time use return gate and fling itself home to report. If the planet looked promising, they'd put together a manned survey expedition. One company decided to gamble by looking at some systems way out there from Earth, farther than anyone had ever reached before, and one of their probes struck gold. The world was KOI 4879.02, an absolute paradise of a planet. I'm talking ideal gravity, temperature, and atmosphere. Resource-rich, fertile ground, even the basic native life forms were cuddly, adorable, and edible. It was ideal for colonization. Unfortunately, it was a long way from Earth. I'm talking over 1,000 light years, distances that it's hard to wrap our insignificant brains around. This wasn't insurmountable though. A gate basically pokes a hole in space and comes out somewhere else, which meant that a ship could transit that insane distance in a matter of months instead of millennia. However, a gate shot of that distance was still a huge expense, far beyond what most nations could afford. A handful of mega-cores decided it was worth the investment to get their own Eden, so they teamed up on the project. This would be one and done, a single transit. One colony ship would be hurled across the galaxy at KOI 4879.02, minimal risk for maximum reward. As a result, the CS New Beginning was the biggest colony ship mankind had ever built. 30 chained together hab pods, each one highly specialized and able to be dropped to the surface to become its own settlement. It was a fully contained colony in one big tube. Our ancestors had been among the 500,000 suckers optimistic or desperate enough to volunteer for that shot. At Paradise, statistically, gate travel is safe. Gates rarely screw up. More than 99.99% of transits end with the ship landing somewhere within a few million kilometers of its intended destination. In astronomical terms, that's nothing. If the many redundant calculations or safety measures failed, or something struck the gate with enough force to shift it off target at the exact moment of transit, a ship could get lost, accidentally hurled to some unknown region of deep space, never to be seen again. Something went horribly wrong. We don't know what happened. It wasn't the ship's fault. During transit, you're basically the bullet being fired from a gun, and the bullet doesn't get much vote what it's aimed at. Rather than landing at the edge of paradise, the new beginning appeared in the middle of nowhere. They weren't in any system at all. I can only imagine the absolute horror as they checked charts and found themselves in the great unknown, way out past anything mankind had ever even peeked at, with no way home. The closest system was 10 years away at maximum burn, and it was a complete unknown. They weren't prepared for that. The new beginning wasn't a generation ship. The only planetary bodies vaguely within its reach were a complete mystery. But it would sit there and die, or maybe, just maybe, reach out and live. A few years and a couple of mutinies in, they changed the name of the ship to the Roanoke. Our people have always had a dark sense of humor like that. While Grady and Borgia took Devin Rudder's body to the morgue and Katango was off finding me a criminal mastermind to talk to, I rode the Sky Bridge to Mount Olympus. I used my badge to get a complimentary seat in coach, sat in the back with the rest of the trash, and skimmed through security video from the stockyard. I still had the smell of that place lodged in my nostrils. The best method of peak-to-peak transport was the Sky Bridge system, which was a fancy name for a bunch of glorified pipes through which barges rode on electromagnetic rails. The quality of the ride was entirely dependent upon how windy it was that day, and Croatoan was always windy. I'd read about Earth hurricanes, what they'd consider a Category 3, we'd call an average. Tuesday, the Sky Bridges were designed to flex to absorb the constantly changing pressure, which made them a lot safer, but the ride always left me a little dizzy. The view was nice though. I could see all of 5 Points. For kilometers in every direction, it was towering black rock peaks and gaping crevasses crisscrossed with thousands of shiny structures. From way up here, the place actually looked clean. Far below, stretching off to the curved horizon was the eternal storm, a never-ending cloud bank of shifting reds, greens, and yellows, illuminated by random bursts of lightning. Except that view reminded me of the time one of the tubes had failed, and an entire passenger barge had gotten dashed against the mountainside doing 180. I'd volunteered to help the traffic wardens look for survivors on the surface. What a mess that had been. So I went back to my security videos. Then I got the call I'd been dreading. It was my boss, the chief superintendent of the ZPD. He usually left me alone to do my thing. It wasn't that he necessarily had my back, but my removal of the chaotic elements plaguing his mountain made his life a little bit nicer. "Hello, Chief. Where are you, Lutero?" He'd surely gotten pinged the second I'd skinned my badge to board the Sky Bridge. He was just asking out of politeness, on my way to talk to the OPD. To see why one of theirs was poking around our turf. Are you sure that's a good idea? Of course not. I bet they'll get all offended over some imagined slight and use that as an excuse to get defensive and not tell me anything. I expect you'll be getting a bunch of angry calls shortly demanding my resignation. How's that different than usual? The chief superintendent wasn't a bad man. He was just an average man stuck in a bad situation, so I didn't judge him too harshly when he had to pull the rug out from under me. We all had jobs to do. At least we could be honest with each other without playing too many games. Is this the part where you order me to stand down? Not this time. Nobody's told me to back off yet, so we're going to proceed. I'm curious about this case myself. OPD's got no reason to stick their noses in our business. We're supposed to be equals. They could at least show us some common fucking courtesy and alert us if they're doing an op on our rock. That assumes rudder was there on police business. Zenith was a destination location for a whole lot of deviants. Whatever your strange, we probably had a sector into that. Maybe he was a tourist. Maybe let me know how they react to the news. Will do. I ended the call. The bot analysis report came back as the barge pulled into Olympus Station. Either Grady's bots were broken or our killer had dropped a bleach bomb on top of the tank because no DNA or prints were found except for ours. Not even from the employees, who we knew for certain had done routine maintenance up there recently, or from Rudder himself. If he'd been forced to climb up that ladder, surely he would have been sweating. It had been humid up there. There should have been some trace evidence. No flecks of gunpowder either. Which was odd. If they had used a bleach bomb, the aerosol fog would have bonded with and then fragmented the DNA and finger oils before evaporating. But the carbon residue from the burning gunpowder should have still been around. I'll admit, this got my curiosity going. I wasn't used to murderers who actively tried to cover their tracks. Murderers in Zenith tended to be a lot more brazen. With topside hiregans, it was usually some variation of, "Yeah, I did it, pig, and I did it on behalf of the megacorp that decides if your family gets water or air. So what are you gonna do about it?" Or if the crime had been at the behest of a low-side syndicate, they usually wanted everybody to know they pulled the trigger because it sent a message. In that case, the cops just shut up and spent our hush money. Being a fan of archaic concepts like justice, I didn't like it much, but it was what it was. Coppers who made too much noise about how our system worked tended to take a one-way sightseeing trip into the acid clouds. It was the regular murderers who lacked official sanction or who broke their organization's rules who I was allowed to remove from the equation. They were usually motivated by passion, greed, or the voices in their heads. I didn't get to deal with a lot of brain surgeons in my line of work, so my suspects usually didn't use black market devices to scrub their premeditated crime scenes. The barge docked, and I departed along with the housekeepers, laborers, and maintenance men. The Zenith dock of Olympus Station was affectionately known as the servants' entrance. I walked out and enjoyed breathing air that didn't taste faintly of rubber. It even smelled like flowers. Olympus was the opposite of Zenith. Everything was clean and orderly. Our leading exports were food and methamphetamine. Theirs was science, technology, and board meetings. This was where the corporations that actually controlled the destiny of our little swath of humanity were all headquartered. Olympus was the home of the cabal. 2 uniformed OPD constables were waiting at the end of the dock. Even their uniforms were neater than ours. They could get away with black slacks, sweaters, a jaunty checkerboard hat, and adorable little shock batons that the average Zenith tweakers would use to play tag with. Our constables walked around in helmets and bulletproof vests, carrying submachine guns. While our constables only got numbers, they had name tags, Riley and Patel, from the fact that my face was floating on their holographic display. They'd clearly been expecting me. I hadn't called ahead either, so much for the element of surprise. Welcome to Olympus, DC Arcade. Please come with us. There was no use in arguing, and besides, I didn't know if my badge would get me a free ride on this rock's public transit system, so I might as well take advantage of the offer. The station had a glass roof that actually allowed everyone to see the sky. That was novel. The 2 constables led me to where their vehicle was parked out front. A sleek security bot held the door open for me. When I got in, I realized it was the first time I'd been in a police cruiser that didn't smell like either puke or industrial cleaning products. The holographic dash had a real-time map of their whole mountain, auto-linked to every camera, and feed there was as the dispatch AI efficiently routed resources to every call. The electric engine was utterly silent as we got into the emergency vehicle side of the tube and effortlessly accelerated to 100 clicks. Nice ride. The constable in the driver's seat, Patel, thought I was being sarcastic. Yeah, sorry about this old hunk of crap. It's due to be replaced, and in 10 years, after the cruiser had gotten beat to crap in one of the middle mountains, the rusted hulk would be handed down to us, where it would be promptly stolen or stripped for parts. So either of you guys know an Inspector Rudder, Devin Rudder? I've met him, Riley, who was clearly the senior of the two, sounded ambivalent. My last partner went to the academy with him. Told me he was a good bloke, said Patel. Rudder the cause of your visit? Afraid so. Ah, is that what this is then? Patel laughed. I heard he was a brawler. Did Rudder cause some kind of trouble down there in Slagtown? I didn't even take that personal. More important, it meant my escorts hadn't been briefed on why I was here. Might as well see what I could glean from there. Reaction. Sure, the kind of trouble that gets you executed and your body left to dissolve in a meat vat. Unfortunately, they both seemed surprised. I'd been hoping the Vic had some kind of rep where they'd have shared a knowing look, like, oh, he got what was coming, shouldn't have been screwing around with insert cause of death here. But there was nothing like that, just honest shock. So Rudder wasn't the sort who, to the rank and file, was obviously guilty of something. Bloody hell. Why'd anybody want to kill poor Rudder? That's what I'm working on. We were zipping past a bunch of new buildings. The people in this dome actually had trees in their yards. They had enough water to spray it on the ground. It's amazing what happens when you have streets instead of tunnels. Rudder's file said he was with your special magistrate's office. What do they do, was he? Now there was some hesitation from Patel. The special magistrates, they're double quotes the devil's right hand, muttered Riley. Because even up here in the sainted halls of Olympus, this was clearly a copper who had been around the block. Never mind that, Patel insisted. I didn't know Rudder was attached to that unit. They do odd jobs, high-profile cases. The special magistrates work out of headquarters. Good thing we're going there. I'm looking forward to getting this all cleared up. Oh, we're not taking you to our HQ, detective. Your presence has been requested on high. Fuck me. We were headed for the spire. The massive structure was just ahead of us. Sometimes called the sixth peak because of how stupidly tall it was, the building loomed over the rest of Olympus. It had a massive base, but came to a narrow point far above. There wasn't an edge to it. The whole armored thing was curved in order to withstand the wind. It was a ridiculous monument to mankind's hubris. So, of course, it was where the Cabal met. We passed the complex that held the official government buildings representing the entire colonial government. They fit in the spire's shadow. That seemed appropriate. There was a security cordon around the spire. Unlike my escorts, these cops were armed to the teeth. I saw exosuits and auto rifles with grenade launchers mounted. What's the threat flavor of the week? I asked. Terrorists, whack jobs, the usual. Riley waved one hand dismissively. There was a bomb threat from some nuts who think Earth is a conspiracy theory. Apparently, mankind is actually from Croatoan, always has been. We're all alone in the universe, and trying to recontact Earth is a big lie to keep us in line. No kidding. That was a new type of crazy for me, so somebody just fabricated. Thousands of years of history and shows and music, and those millions of books we brought digital copies of to fool us. These mopes don't strike me as big readers, detective. The Never-Earthers say the Cabal just wants to build that giant ring in space for some nefarious reasons that have nothing to do with being able to get out of this system. There were lots of people who were against a new gate project, not because Earth was a myth, but Rather because it would be the most expensive resource suck ever, which would take a generation to complete if it worked. Our last attempt to build a gate, even using the high-quality materials we had brought from Earth, had been a miserable failure that had cost a lot of money and lives. Historically, this colony did not have a great track record when it came to gate safety. The constables let me out at the entrance and wished me luck. They'd wait to give me a ride back to the station. I was met by armed guards who insisted on securing my firearms for my safety. Once I was disarmed, they scanned me again to be sure I wasn't packing any subcutaneous weapons. That said a lot about how the corpos felt about us public servants. None of the guards was feeling talkative as they led me through a lobby the size of my home sector. The well-dressed staff looked at me and sneered. It made me wonder if some of that burning hair smell from the stockyard had soaked into my clothing and I just hadn't noticed. Then we rode the lift up to the 50th floor. That level meant I had been summoned by upper management, which was high enough to make me real nervous. I was Icarus with wings of wax. The blue and white logo on the wall belonged to Omnicrotone. It was familiar enough since it had been plastered all over the stockyard too. Great. They were probably going to silence me because they didn't want people freaking out about potentially having human remains in their pseudo-pig byproducts. The sign on the door the guards walked me to read, Dr. Olivier Villeneuve, Chief Technical Officer, Research and Development Department. That was curious. I'd been expecting some kind of public relations person. Regardless, I'd have to tread carefully. I had a big mouth and an unfortunate tendency towards saying what I meant, bad habits to have in the sphere. Corpos like this had ways of making your life miserable, which were as creative as they were obscene. At least the CTO of R&D had a good-looking secretary. I mean, this woman was downright stunning. There had to be some genetic modifications going on there or something, because humans weren't supposed to glow like angels. The most beautiful woman I'd ever seen looked upon me like the gorilla in the Olympus Zoo must have escaped, Lutero Cade. As if there was any doubt as to my identity, and there was some other knuckle-dragging Xenothan blundering about in their cathedral. That's Detective Chief Inspector Cade, ma'am, because even though my title didn't mean shit to these people, I'd still earned it by brain and fist, so it meant something to me. Of course, Mr. Villeneuve is ready to see you now, the goddess buzzed me in. The guard stayed in the outer office with her. Couldn't blame them. I'd stay and gaze in wonderment for a while if I could too, except when I went in. The office took my breath away even more than she had. The room was 50 meters across easily, and the entire back wall was armored glass. I could see forever, which was when it hit me that I was standing in the tallest building on the tallest peak, so this was the farthest I'd ever been from home. I walked past display cases of, could it be, actual Earth artifacts? These didn't look like reproductions. They were original items from the colony ship. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a pressure helmet with the words New Beginning struck out in Roanoke painted over it. There was an original nanofabricator sheet, tools, instruments, sensors, and personal belongings, like aged plastic toys that had surely been made on Earth. It took all my will to not stop and gawk. A small man was sitting behind a large desk. DCI Cade, welcome. Olivier Villeneuve, a pleasure to meet you. He flashed me a warm smile as he stood up to shake my hand, firm grip and eye contact, like we were peers. That was unexpected. I'd assumed we'd skip right to the yelling. Please, have a seat. He returned to his. I pulled up one of the chairs and sat down. It was perhaps the softest chair in the world. If this was how the 50th floor lived, maybe I should have gone corporate when I had the chance. Thank you for coming on such short notice. It hadn't been any notice at all, but he'd been friendly thus far, so there was no need to get belligerent quite yet. No problem. I take it that you have some interest in my case. Indeed, I do. Would you care for a drink? I can have Sophia fetch us something. If Sophia was the name of his secretary, I wasn't about to turn down a free drink from a goddess. I'll admit, in a place this swanky, I was tempted to ask to use the bathroom just so I could drink from the faucet to see what water was actually supposed to taste like. I'll have whatever you're having. Is it acceptable for you to consume alcohol while on duty? Regulations and whatnot. They don't care as long as we don't shoot too many citizens by accident. I was only being partially facetious. Excellent. Then I'll try not to waste too much of your time. I know that you're a very busy man. He said that so earnestly, I almost believed him. Villeneuve was surely older than me, but it was clear that he'd been gene-tailored, so it was impossible to guess his age. He'd allowed himself the affectation of silver hair to look distinguished, but with access to the quality medical care they took for granted. In Olympus, he could be really old and still getting around fine. I just reviewed your file. Most impressive, really. One reason I was an effective interviewer was that I'd been born with what my mom had called my incredulous eyebrow. Basically, one of them was crooked and had a bit of a point in the middle, which meant that I always looked suspicious and disbelieving, even when I wasn't. It's a real pain in the ass when it comes to relationships. Villeneuve must have caught the eyebrow. No, I mean it. I did some checking. Your reputation precedes you. It was the second time today I'd had to ask what my rep was, and that is a true rarity. You may be the only honest policeman in the 5 points. I wouldn't go that far, Doctor. It's all relative. There's a lot of folks who are as honest as their circumstances allow them to be, and yet most of us fail to reach even that low bar. He must have flashed a silent message to his secretary sometime during our exchange, because she arrived with a bottle and 2 glasses full of ice on a tray. It was whiskey from a distillery on Olympus that I'd heard of, but never been able to afford to try. She poured us each a generous helping. If that was a normal serving for before lunchtime, then Villeneuve's Jean Mauds must have included an upgraded liver. She gave us our full glasses, left the bottle on the desk, and began walking away. Not watching her go was nearly as hard as not staring at the relics from the Roanoke. I sipped the whiskey. It was very good. I've also heard that you're extremely good at your job. DCI'd. If I may be so bold, how many men have you killed? I paused, glass still at my lip. In the line of duty? Of course, he clarified, as if there would be any other kind, which just showed a lack of imagination on his part. His question was so unexpected that even the goddess paused, curious to hear my answer. It took me a moment to diplomatically arrange my response. None of your damned business would have been appropriate, but unappreciated here. A few. 17 is more than a few. Those were just the ones with paperwork on them. ZPD was notorious for not doing our paperwork. I do try to arrest them first. However, they still get a vote in how it all shakes out. Has everyone you've ever shot deserved it? For that one, I didn't even need to think it over. Without a doubt, none at all. In a place where everybody had to justify the calories necessary to keep them alive, a society couldn't be too loose about the concept of rehabilitation. We basically had 3 levels of sentencing in 5 points. Fines for non-violent offenses, hard labor for the violent offenders who the judge thought might someday possibly be worth a damn, and death for those who weren't. The kind of mooks they usually sent me after were already way past the point of no return. I knew it, they knew it. The conclusion to that sort of confrontation was inevitable. 0. That seemed to please the corporate man. I saw Sophia's reaction in the window's reflection. I couldn't tell exactly what she thought about that, but it wasn't kind. So much for asking for her number. Once the secretary left, the CTO got down to business. I have a vested interest in seeing the killers of Devin Rudder brought to justice, whoever they may be. By justice, I notice you asked about how many suspects I've killed, not how many I've arrested. That is correct. You may derive your own conclusions from that. The friendly veneer was gone, and now I was dealing with a corpo on a mission. I would like to see this case concluded swiftly. I am prepared to offer the full support of Omnicroton to aid you. We will not hamper your investigation in any way. This meeting had gone in an entirely unexpected direction. I was used to being muzzled by the forces of the Cabal. Instead, they were letting me off the leash. I took another drink. OPD will claim jurisdiction. The crime was on my mountain, but he was one of theirs. I'm aware, except I've already informed their superintendents that you'll be in charge. He didn't have any official authority over the police, but we both knew how much official was worth. This one isn't getting swept under the rug. Then, at least with the doctor, I didn't have to explain Earth idioms. There will be no cover-up this time, Detective. I want you to find the culprits, whoever they may be. Okay then. What was the nature of your relationship with the victim? Devin was a good friend. We shared an interest you also share, which was why when I saw your file, I knew you were the man for the job. I was truly baffled. What could I possibly have in common with two guys from Olympus? Not a lot of golf courses on my mountain. And that is, a fascination with the past. I pulled all your records. Most of the youth from your sector are destined to become laborers, basic tradesmen at best. You, on the other hand, had test scores high enough that you could have continued training in whatever field you wished, all paid for by the colony. History was your best subject, and your marks indicated an outstanding memory and attention to detail. Instead, upon reaching your mandatory minimum colonial education requirements, you became a police constable. It was either that or mushroom farmer. I also took the liberty of pulling the list of books and programs you've downloaded from the central database over the last few years. Those records were supposed to be secret, so of course a member of the Cabal could just snap his fingers and get them. It would appear that you have retained your love of history, especially pertaining to the founding of our colony and the expedition leading up to it. Everybody needs a hobby, a fitting one, considering your personal connection. I'm not special. Every single person on this planet has a personal connection to the Roanoke, except only one of us is the descendant of Chief Navigator Severo Cade. Of course, the guy with the office full of relics would know about my family tree. It wasn't his fault we got lost. I know that. You know that. Everyone who knows the fundamentals of how gate mechanics work knows that. Sadly, for poor Severo, the angry mob didn't see it that way. They needed someone to blame. Luckily for you, the mutineers spared his children. That was merciful of them. Good old scapegoat Cade, who got tossed out an airlock for condemning us all. That always made for a fun school day, full of getting jumped and beaten when the dumb kids learned about that part and connected our last names. It didn't matter that when the gate launched us off course, he was just a helpless passenger, same as everyone else aboard. In reality, Detective, your forebear may have saved us all. He's the one who spotted this system and came up with that clever slingshot course around the outer planets, which got us here with supplies to spare. Villeneuve got up and walked to the shelf of antiques. Devin Rudder had been a treasure hunter. Patel and Riley served as my chauffeurs, but I made them wait at the street level, which they really didn't like, but too bad. Villeneuve had agreed that I could have first crack at Rudder's apartment. I had Constable Katang to meet me there. He hadn't even had time to change out of his body armor before catching the Skyway, so he really stuck out in this polite crowd. From the overwhelmed expression on his face, this was the first time he'd been under one of Olympus' domes. All this excess space was a little overwhelming. You look like a deer in The headlights, kid, what's a deer? Earth mammal, with the antlers, didn't you ever watch old cartoons? The colonists had brought millions of animal embryos with them, but it wasn't like we had a lot of extra space where we'd been able to grow them, never mind. Come on. Any luck on arranging that meeting? Not yet. But the tank's drained, and they're autopsying the body already. That usually takes weeks. How'd you jump to the front of the line? The coroner owes me favors. As we walked through the common area, we got a lot of strange looks from Rudder's neighbors. Katanga looked like he was going to war, and even though I was in plain clothes, my best was shoddy by their standards. Was there a gun found in the vat? No. So much for Borges' idiotic suicide theory. We walked to the lift, and I hit the button for the 4th floor. Why'd you have me come up here, detective? I like to have a fresh set of eyes. When you think you know everything, it's easy to get in your own head and miss the obvious. Plus, you need to learn. What are we looking for? Clues, Katanga, clues, it's victimology. Learning about the Vic teaches you about the killer. Unless it's a rondo, then this will be a waste of time. Rudder's room was at the end of the hall. The lock automatically clicked open when it sensed my badge approaching. Villeneuve had told the OPD to give me full access, and it appeared they weren't going to screw with me yet. Good. Breaking in would have complicated things. If we were lucky, the room hadn't been tossed yet. Glove up. Rudder's apartment was big, 3 whole rooms, and nice and neat. I could already tell that he was an orderly sort. Everything was in its place. Everything was clean. The bed was even made. Katanga saw that there was an actual window and whistled. Damn, if he can afford this on a cop salary, OPD pays way more than we do, or they get better bribes. No need to beat around the bush. Katanga paused to pick up a reading pad from the table. You've got a real odd fixation on old-timey Earth sayings, detective. That I did, but most of us were on the take one way or another. I'm sure the constable was no different. So might as well get a few things straight from the beginning. I don't care what you get up to on your own time, Katanga, but if somebody tries to sway you, make you look the other way, or find out what you know about one of my cases, I need to know about it. Loyalty tests already. He put the reader down when he found it was password protected. You think I accepted this assignment just to sell you out? No, but it is what it is, kid. They'll see you as the weak link. Nothing personal, they always do with the new guy. Who's they? I don't know yet, but there's bound to be someone. Look, I'm not saying don't take their money. That would be suspicious. Just afterwards, tell me, preferably someplace that isn't bugged. The who and how much they're willing to pay will tell me a lot. I pulled the tiny crime scene bot out of my coat pocket, activated it, and let it fly. It would do a full scan of the apartment, checking for things like prints or anything that could be DNA sequenced. They were handy, but I trusted my own senses a lot more. Bots could be programmed to lie. Check the obvious hiding spots first. Drawers, toilet tank. Then check inside the vents and ceiling tiles, wherever he could hide something. Use your imagination. Anything in particular I'm looking for? Katanga asked. You'll know it when you see it. My answer was vague, because I didn't really know yet. Either, depending on what got his attention, that would tell me if Katanga had a detective's instincts or not. Don't trash anything. OPD is still going to do their own investigation. I took the sleeping room while Katanga checked the kitchen and living area. The bot pinged me to move the blankets and pillows out of the way for it to scan. While it did that, I checked the closet. All the clothes were the same cut and limited to just a few different colors. Rudder was the kind of guy who dressed the same every day. People like that were either really boring or they were trying to save valuable brain space to concentrate on the important stuff. Odds were he was just boring. I checked the pockets, but found nothing. Judging from the dust, his official uniform didn't get used much. He was like me in that respect. His armor looked brand new. They probably didn't get a lot of riot calls. On Olympus, there were no pictures. Most people set their wall displays to cycle through pictures, personal stuff, family, loved ones, or at least pieces of art or old landscapes. Rudder liked his walls blank. Too bad. I could learn a lot about somebody by what they like to look at. The bot pinged me again. It had found something interesting on the bed. There was recent DNA from 6 different people so far and counting. Katanga had gotten that. Message 2. I heard him laughing in the kitchen. What does this information tell us, Constable? Dude's a slut. It tells me he badly needed to change the sheets. So much for my theory that Rudder was boring. I checked the drawers. His issue sidearm was there, still in the duty holster. There was a charger for a phone, but the phone itself was missing. Hopefully it would be on his body. Oh, shit. What is it, Katanga? I don't really. No, you'd better see this for yourself, Detective. I went into the living area. Katanga had pulled the couch out of the way. I saw the scuff marks on the floor. I was able to pop one of the wall panels off behind it. Good eye. I knelt down to look inside the gap. I blinked a few times, confused, and then had to turn my light on to see better. What do we have here? Is that a space suit? Katanga asked. The hidden compartment was narrow and mostly filled with a big open duffel bag. The thing inside the bag sure looked like a space suit, and I don't mean the clunky environment suits people had to wear while working on the exterior of our mountain, or even what our comet miners wore now. This was a sleek skin suit, thin enough to fit under regular clothing, but with a folding hood and visor. This looked like something off the Roanoke. I think so. Shouldn't that be in the museum? I hadn't told Katanga about Rudder being a treasure hunter yet. Probably. I moved the suit. It was even lighter than it looked, and there was black dust on it, like it had been used on one of our mountainsides recently. Beneath the suit were some tools. It looked like a rock hammer and plasma cutter. There was another handgun, only this one wasn't official issue. It was a homemade print job, off the books. It looked gritty, like it had been on the surface and not clean since. I whistled for the bot to come over and scan the bag. Then I stuck my head further into the compartment. Something seemed off about the back wall. The material looked different from the rest of the space, and when I poked at it, there was a tiny bit of flex as if there might be a secret door inside the secret compartment. Most searchers would have assumed the bag was all. I only noticed because I had a lot of experience looking for contraband. What did you find? Katanga asked. I'm not sure. It took me a second to figure out how to remove the back panel, and when I did, it turned out to be really heavy. The space on the other side was much smaller. The only thing inside was a metal lockbox with a biometric reader. I started to reach for it, except that was when the bot sounded an alarm that I'd only ever heard in training. It was the noise, signaling potentially dangerous radiation levels. Katanga shouted, ... We've got to go. I jerked my hand away from the mystery box and got the hell out of there. As the two of us ran for the door, I ordered the bot to stay and scan the compartment. We got into the hall and slammed the door. Katanga had already activated the portable scanner on his armor. There were enough old Earth reactors still active on this rock that every constable was issued a basic rad counter in their kit. How bad, Katanga? I'm okay. Then he took the little device off his belt and ran it over me. I'd always expected to get killed the old-fashioned way, by bullet, knife, or club. I'd never really thought about having my organs melt. I asked him, that panel you removed, was it made out of lead? No, it was light. It just kind of slid into place. The one I moved weighed a ton. Too bad I didn't realize. It was shielding at the time. Is this the part where my eyes start bleeding? The scanner chimed. Katanga checked the results. You're going to be fine. I took a deep breath. Then I took the sensor from him and ran it over myself again to be sure. It was saying that I was clean. Then I checked the bot's recording. If these devices that had been built by the lowest bidder were accurate, in the few seconds that I'd stuck my hand into that second hole in the wall, I'd received the equivalent to a full-body CT scan. So, nowhere near lethal, but still rather disconcerting. A warning light began flashing in the hall, and a recorded voice warned all the residents to stay in their apartments to await the authorities. The bot had automatically alerted the locals. Their programming didn't mess around when it came to detecting dangerous chemicals, biological agents, or potential nuclear threats. 5 Points was a fragile ecosystem. My phone started buzzing. The OPD constables I'd left outside were surely headed this way fast. Emergency services would be descending on this building like locusts. Katanga and I would have to go through a mandatory decan process. "We better get to the hospital just in case," he said. "Yeah, sure. But before we did that, I sent a message to my bot to switch to secure mode. The feed would be encrypted and transmitted to me only. The lift had automatically shut down, and we didn't have the local overrides, so we headed for the stairs. While we hurried down, I checked out the bot's feed. It was confusing. Whatever was in that lockbox was putting out all sorts of bizarre readings. I had a scroll full of question marks and conflicting error messages. By the time we reached the ground floor, my feed was cut. Somebody with a lot of clout had just overridden my commands and kicked me out of the system. It was their bot now. What the hell was in Rudder's lockbox? After getting scrubbed, showered, tested, blood drawn, and shot up with some just-in-case drugs the OPD gave me and Katanga our freshly sanitized gear back. The entire time, nobody would tell me what was in that fucking box. All I was told was that they'd brought in hazmat to give Rudder's building a thorough search, and that they'd be in touch once they were done. Say what you will about the Olympians, but their hospitals are great. I'd gotten stitched up or treated a bunch of times at Zenith General, which was the finest medical establishment on our mountain. It would probably get condemned here. The whole time we were being tested, the local detectives grilled us about what we'd seen in the apartment. It was obvious they were ticked at us bumpkins from Slagtown. Had gotten first crack at their dead cop's place. The Dias were restrained, all things considered. Neither one of us got so much as cursed at, but that was probably only because the CTO at Omnicro Atahan had taken a personal interest in this case. Nobody from the Special Magistrate's office returned my calls either. I hoped it was because they were busy making sure all of the most dangerous experimental tech on the colony was still safely locked up, and that whoever had capped Rudder hadn't tortured anything too important out of him first. On that note, I got a message that the autopsy was done. Katanga got a message too, and since he wouldn't talk about it in front of the OPD, it was probably from his gang contacts. Once I figured I'd learned everything I could from the OPD's questions, they didn't seem to have a clue what had gotten Rudder killed. I told them we were leaving, and walked out. The fact that they didn't try to stop me meant Villeneuve really had called in some favors with their brass. Katanga and I took the Sky Bridge back down, and then caught a hopper to ZPD headquarters. Of course, I got teased by the guys at the station for getting irradiated. It would be just like Lutero Cade to survive the shitstorm for 20 years, only to get killed by accident on the rich and fluffy mountain of softness and safety. Somebody had pulled a Geiger counter out of storage and left it on my desk with a bow on it. It was nice to know they still cared. Grady and Borgia briefed me on the final crime scene findings and what they'd gotten from interviewing the stockyard workers. As was tradition, nobody saw nothing, and if anybody did see something, they'd surely forgotten about it by the time we asked. Though this time, my gut was telling me that there hadn't been any. witnesses to Rutter's final moments except for his killers. Since my new assistant was off talking to gangsters and I didn't trust Grady or like Borgia, I went to the morgue by myself. It was busy as usual. An astounding number of people died on this rock. Fortunately for our species, we just keep on making new ones. The head coroner was Rachel Crumpton, but everybody called her Pie, not that I knew where the nickname came from. The staff told me. She was working in the autopsy room. I found her up to her wrists in some poor guy's torso. "Hey, Lou," she gave me a little nod when she saw me enter. "How's it going, Pie?" "Pretty good." She dropped a big wet liver onto a stainless steel scale with a plop. "I finished your vat floater an hour ago. I heard you got irradiated. Just a little. Autopsy's done, but you've not put your report in the system yet." "Nope, just like you asked, only." "Because you asked nice. I'd wanted to hear her findings first, because I had a sneaky feeling once her report got filed, very important people would be accessing it. I didn't know if there was anything useful in it, but if there was, I could use the head start." "I always ask nice," I said as I took the 50-round box of department-issued hollow points out of my pocket and set them on the counter. Ammunition from the factory on Mount Sinai was more reliable than anything we could fab using homemade chemical primers here. Katanga had asked how I skipped the waiting list for autopsies, but when you don't have money for bribes, you had to get creative. Whoops. I dropped something. Pi pulled off her gloves, scooped up the ammo, read the label, said a quick nice, and then swiftly stuck the ammo into her lab coat. The morgue wasn't exactly in the best part of town. I can delay uploading the report for a few more hours before anybody gets suspicious. "Your guy is over here. Anything stand out? Oh, yeah. This one is weird, and not just because he's made my whole office smell like bacon." She pulled open one of the big drawers, revealing the pale corpse of Devin Rutter. The vat cooking process had rendered him partially translucent, which was gross, even by my jaded standards. Honestly, this one was curious enough that I would have bumped him up in the queue even without the usual bribery ammo. "Want to give that box back so I can save it for my next body?" "Fat chance." She called her scanner bot and had it hover over Rutter's remains. The holoprojector began displaying stats and images. "Let me know when you get to the cool part." Pi knew I'd been through so many of these that she didn't bother giving me the blow-by-blow. Time of death was hard to pin down because of the heat and pressure in the tank, but it was probably between midnight and 2 o'clock. The stockyard had discovered him and called us at 6 o'clock. His tox screen was clean. There were some minor injuries, bumps, bruises, scrapes, that sort of thing, but no sign of torture. Cause of death was what appeared to be a gunshot wound to the head, only she'd crossed that out and then flagged it as indeterminate. What's with the GSW? That's where it gets odd. No exit wounds suggested to me a small caliber, low-velocity round that would still be stuck in there. Only scans couldn't find any metals. When I sawed his skull open, it was a real mess. The thing that killed him had been going fast, punched through, and then it looked like it had tumbled and fragmented. I started following the different wound tracks, but still couldn't find a projectile. What? It was rare that my assessment would be off by that much. I'd thought for sure he'd been put in a tank and then shot. Did he get stabbed with a blender? Nope. The wound looked like it was from a bullet. For a second, I thought maybe by some miracle, it bounced off the back of his skull and popped back out the entrance wound. You went to doctor's school, right, Pi? Stranger things have happened. But anyways, that's when I found this embedded in his brain. She brought over a sealed bowl to show me. It looked like a thin line of white sand. How'd that get in there? That's the thing. It wasn't powder when I pulled it out. When I found it, it looked like a white needle. I had mistaken the other bits as skull fragments, only I didn't realize that they started breaking down as soon as they were exposed to oxygen. I'm talking rapid decay like nothing I've ever heard of before, by the time I realized that and sealed this. Chunk off, it was already too late, and it had crumbled to dust. That's different. I held the clear bowl up to the light. What's it made of? All that was left by the time I could test was calcium and trace elements. Whatever the decaying agent was, it bubbled off and took any DNA that might have been there with it. Basically, it's bone treated with some unknown chemicals. The one resource this colony didn't lack for was metals, so making a bullet out of something other than lead and copper sounded bizarre to me. That seems like an awful lot of effort to go through just to have a disintegrating bullet. If they're worried about ballistic matches, just toss the murder weapon over a cliff and let the clouds eat it. Anybody can print a new gun in less time than it takes to get a pizza delivered. You're missing the point, Lou. That bullet was organic. It looked like it had been grown. I hesitated before saying, there wasn't any gunpowder residue at the scene either. There wouldn't be if it wasn't launched from a gun. So you're saying that my Vic was killed by some kind of unknown bioweapon? And here I was thinking that getting irradiated by a mystery box would be the strangest thing about my day. The next morning, Constable Katanga called and asked me to meet him at a certain food stand on the north side of Sector 15. 5 Points was the proverbial melting pot. The original colonists had been as genetically diverse a population as possible, drawn from more than 50 Earth countries and a few other off-world colonies, and then sorted into their hab modules by career specialty rather than cultural, ethnic, or religious identity. The result of this grand experiment was that the survivors of the landing had then split themselves into tribes anyway whose worth was based upon how valuable their hab was to the overall survival of the colony. Zenith had ended up with a bunch of specialists who would have been great on the lush, temperate world we'd been aiming for, but in the rocky nightmare hellscape we'd landed on instead, our habs had been the least useful, so we'd ended up as the tail end of every supply chain. For the first few decades here, our survival had been an afterthought. That skill deficit had certainly evened out over the generations since and was almost non-existent now, but the social stigma remained. Part of that was because Zenith was home to most of 5 Point slums. Katanga had wanted to meet in Makoko Cavern, which was about the worst place on the planet not actively covered in acid. The cavern was buildings on top of buildings on top of buildings, most of them made before this mountain had ever even thought about instituting things like safety codes. Not that everyone wouldn't have ignored them anyway. Getting around Makoko required using a confusing mess of tiny winding street. People had built along all the natural rock formations, and when that space hadn't been enough, they dug into and through them. And when that still wasn't enough room for the expanding population, they'd suspended bridges between the buildings to build into the sides of the massive stalactites. Anything that could be reached by human hands had graffiti on it, and some of the heights we could reach were downright surprising. High above, giant fans slowly turned, circulating the air. Even by 5 Point standards, this cavern was loud and crowded. Thousands of people in every direction, all babbling or yelling at each other. English had been the official language of the colony ship, and everybody spoke it, but every sector had developed its own dialect. In Makoko, everybody sounded perpetually agitated and talked with their hands. I was used to it, but the noise still made my head hurt. Katanga was waiting for me at the food stand. It was noodles, of course, because noodles could be made out of damn near anything. There was always noodles. The constable had ditched his armor so as not to stand out and was slurping down some ramen. I sat next to him. That's not pork flavor, is it? Chicken. I'm afraid the stockyard's too cheap to actually throw away a whole vat of protein just because of one rotting dead guy in it. I'll give it a few weeks. Good call. I noticed that we were being watched from across the street. For men, obvious gangers, they weren't even trying to hide the fact that they were heavily armed. Not that anybody in this neighborhood was going to give them lip over it. Constables. Didn't come in here on official business in less than a squad-sized element. Those your friends. Katanga finished his noodles. One of them is my cousin, Kojo. He set up the meat for me, but this isn't his regular crew. So please don't do anything that'll make me lose face. Got it? If I caused trouble, Katanga would probably have to move. I'd checked his file. He lived not too far from here. This gonna complicate life for you a little. Katanga admitted, I walked away from clan law. A few are still sore about that. I was never a made man. No leaving after being bound like that. I was just an affiliate. Still, some think that makes me a traitor. That going to be a problem? He shook his head. I don't think so. Kojo's basically a good guy, always been a smart one. If I die on his watch, Grandma will never speak to him again, and Kojo loves Grandma. Anything else I should? No, the street boss is named Grell. He's not got a direct line to the clan boss, but he's close enough. If Rudder was doing anything on the downside of the 5th 10th sector, Grell knows about it. Problem is, he's a fucking psycho. Nobody around here likes him, but they're all afraid to speak up. He earns good enough, so the clan leaves him in place. Depending on what Grell tells you, you're going to owe him. Yeah, I figured. That was how things work down here. A favor for a favor. What you owe is between you and him, but I'd suggest thinking long and hard what solving this case is worth to you before you ask too much. Grell isn't the kind of man you want gunning for you if you can't deliver. There's horror stories about what happens when he feels wronged. I know, Katanga. I'm serious detective. These types so. I pulled back my sleeve and showed him my resume. The constable immediately shut up because my old tats told him that I'd seen some shit in the Black 13th. Damn, sorry. I guess you already know all about guys like this. No worries, kid. I put my sleeve back down, hiding all the skulls, bullets, ravens, and machetes. It's not something I talk about in polite company. Let's go. Grell was fat. Getting fat was a challenge on this mountain. It took a lot of effort or a glandular problem. Katanga had done the introductions, going through all the street etiquette of who vouched for who and who was related to whom. They didn't automatically hate him for being a cop. Badoon clan had plenty of members become police. But I could tell they kind of hated him for being his own man. They didn't own him. He didn't owe them, and that bothered Grell. The fat man sat on a big stuffed chair like it was a throne on the other side of a table that was covered in money, drugs, and guns, across from the cops, and he knew that we weren't in a position to say shit about anything. This was his kingdom. We were just the trash collectors. As Katanga went through his mandatory spiel, I took in the surroundings. Business must be good for Badoon clan. The meeting room was small, but the digs were nicer than expected. Not spire nice, but respectable for the downside. Grell had an entourage of 6 goons hanging around him, and 2 more placed strategically behind us, all of whom were probably prepared to shoot us if we got out of line. They were playing some old earth music that the fat man most likely thought accentuated his gangster nature. I didn't have the heart to tell him that this stuff had been pop music made by a bunch of Korean teenagers. Brother Katanga, I'm happy to help the police today, reigniting the fires of friendship between U.S. Close that gap, you know. Bring you back into the safety of the clan. The constable was looking really uncomfortable playing this game. I'm just making introductions on behalf of my boss. I need no favors for myself. I spoke up for the first time. Introductions are complete. Thank you, constable. That'll be all. Nice to meet you, Mr. Grell. Grell's eyes narrowed dangerously. He'd been hoping to get his hooks into another young cop, but that wasn't going to happen today. Rules were rules. The pleasure is all mine, finally getting to meet the great DCI Lutero Cade, solver of mysteries, killer of baddies. The man, myth, and legend himself. I'm just a guy with questions. Questions got a cost, fam. I'll pay when you've got answers. Did you know Devin Rudder? Not personally. He had dealings with my clan. I got my cut. Do you know who killed him? Grell spread his meaty hands apologetically. I do not. If I did, I'd gladly say, because it weren't one of mine. Do you know why he was killed? Grell smiled, a predator with gold-plated teeth. He had an answer to that one, but it would cost me. What is such knowledge worth to you? I'm just filling in the gaps. The more he thought I already knew, the less valuable he was to me, and the less he could demand in exchange. It was time to toss out some theories. Rudder hunted treasure, deep, dark, and outside, wearing an antique suit. An upside cop would think, who knows this land better than the local clan who uses those tunnels? He came to you for guides. The mobster was surprised I knew that much. He loved him some trinkets. Leftovers from landing day fetch a high price. Highest bidding corpo wins. Competition gets cutthroat fierce. But the topsiders call us violent. He barked a laugh, so his entourage echoed it. He did pay us for passage, but I sent no guide with him. He went to the deeps on his own. I was pretty good at telling when someone was lying to me. Grell believed what he was saying, but Rudder was too meticulous. The Zenith deeps were a confusing maze. He had an official excuse to be down there as long as the Omnidig project was going on, but coming here without that excuse would raise too many questions. The dig would be over in a few months. He wouldn't waste precious time blundering around in the dark by himself. For this next part, I watched the crowd. Whichever one of you was Rudder's guide for his big score needs to get tested for radiation sickness. I saw where it was stored yesterday. It was putting out serious rides. One of the goons' eyes widened while I spoke. Bingo. I turned to face him and tried to sound shocked and concerned. Please don't tell me you handled that thing with your bare hands. Grell glanced over, saw that his man had gone real pale, and frowned. You hustling on the side, T doing business without giving me my cut. Sorry, boss. It was on my own time. The Olympian paid to good. Where'd you take him? I asked before Grell realized that I was cutting him out of the information favor loop. Near the long drop-off Barker Cove where the miners quit because they kept seeing ghosts. Is that scary weird thing the cop brought up really poisonous? I've been feeling real sick. Yeah, you need to get to a doctor. The next part was a big reach, but I went for it anyway. I can tell you how much danger you're in, but you'll need to describe exactly what the thing Rudder found looked like. You keep your mouth shut, T. Grell shouted. Except the guide was terrified that his extracurricular activities had just caught him a death sentence. It was made of ghost lights, man. Then Grell shot T in the head. I'd been so focused on T's words that I'd not seen Grell pull. He was fast for a fat guy. The goons lurched to their feet. What the fuck, man? Screamed the one who'd just gotten brain matter all over his shirt. I told him to shut up. Ears were ringing. Guns and knives were drawn. Katango was freaking out, but didn't dare move. I sat there, trying to look calm. You killed T, shouted Kojo, and Katanga's cousin seemed really displeased by that. My guess was that he and T had been buddies. Shut up or you're next. Grell turned back to face me, gesturing with his gaudy gold-plated hand cannon. Now, where were we? I'd seen that look before. This guy was bloodthirsty, and on a roll. We were just leaving. Not so fast, pig. We're not done here. I'll say when you can leave. You came for answers. My man gave answers. So you pay me. Gravity caused T's body to slowly slide down his chair until he flopped out of it and spilled onto the floor. Grell obviously hadn't thought his outburst through, because that was going to leave a bad stain on the floor. A professional would have put down a tarp first. I read the room. Most of them had been taken by surprise, but Kojo was the only one who seemed really personally offended by the sudden murder. He was furious and twitchy. The body hitting the ground like a sack of trash had pushed him over the edge. He was about to do something stupid. In the wall display's reflection, I could see that the guys standing behind me and Katango were still focused on the body, not us. Somebody else saw what was about to happen and whispered, "Don't do it, Kaj." But all his warning did was focus their boss' attention on the pending mutiny. I could tell where this was going. In the next few heartbeats, Grell would shoot Kojo or Kojo would shoot Grell. Then Grell's men would react and shoot Kojo. Once Katanga realized what was going on, he was too honorable to let his cousin get gunned down without doing something about it. So he'd get killed too, and then they'd waste me just for good measure. So I really didn't have much choice but to act. "You motherfucker," Kojo reached for the gun in his waistband as Grell swung his hand cannon in Kojo's direction. Grell was fast for a fat guy, but I was just plain fast. I drew and fired, clipping Grell along the way, but I immediately transitioned to the mook packing the auto shotgun standing behind him. At this distance, that thing could be loaded with breath mints, and it would still cut you in half. Most dangerous weapon takes precedence, and I put a controlled pair into his chest. Then I dropped from my chair, spun around, and put two into the man who was supposed to have been watching me. Kojo was shooting at Grell. Grell was shooting at Kojo. They were only a couple meters apart, but neither was exactly a crack shot marksman. While both of them flinched and cranked off a bunch of random rounds, Katanga reacted faster than I thought he would, leaping to his feet and pulling his piece. The rest of the goons moved as the room went nuts. Bullets were flying, tearing through the furniture, bouncing off the steel table and puckering the walls. The guy behind Katanga tackled him. The two of them crashed into the table, knocking baggies onto the floor. I looked for a shot, didn't have one. Went to one knee and nailed another gunman repeatedly in the leg. He fell over and I put an anchor shot to his temple. Grell was still banging away, hitting everything but Kojo. He even brained the man who had been sitting on the couch next to Kojo. Though Katanga was getting choked and thrown around, he extended his pistol and nailed Grell in the throat. The fat man dropped his cannon and grabbed for his neck as arterial spray painted the walls. Then Katanga lowered his piece and shot the man grappling him in the thigh. That got him to let go, and the newly open space gave me a clean angle. We both nailed the thug repeatedly. Before he fell, there was a flash of steel flying across the room. Katanga bellowed as a knife was planted into the meat of his shoulder. Who the fuck throws knives? But there was this little asshole standing there, fist cocked back to throw another one. Then Kojo shot him in the chest an instant before I shot him in the head. The knife thrower went down hard. It was over. The whole thing had only lasted a few seconds. The little room was a blood-soaked mess. There was carbon hanging in the air. Three of us were still standing. Somebody on the floor made a gurgling noise. Grell was flopping around in his chair, both hands pressed to his neck, trying to plug the leak. I swapped out my partially spent mag for a fresh one, just in case. "You okay, Primo?" Kojo asked. "Yeah." Katanga cringed as he reached for the handle sticking out of him to pull the knife out, but I grabbed his wrist to stop him. "Trust me, it's better to leave it in until the paramedics get here." Despite all the bullets hurled his way, it looked like Kojo had only gotten grazed. But from the look of growing horror on our surviving gangster's face, it was apparently sinking in what a shitshow this was. "Hey, buddy, listen carefully." I walked over and got right in Kojo's face. "Here's the story you're going to tell. Your boss went bugnuts rage crazy for no reason and started killing his men. From what I've seen, that's not going to be a hard sell to your clan. They'll check, and they've surely got cops on their payroll, but the official investigation will show that at least 2 of them died by bullets from his gun. Your invited guests understandably overreacted and things got wild. You had no choice but to put Grell down to restore order. Got it. As I said all that, Grell watched me, voiceless but angry. Kojo wasn't stupid. This might actually be a career opportunity for him. Yeah, okay. That works. Kojo stepped forward and mercilessly executed Grell. He turned back to Katanga. I'm super sorry about the knife, bro. Please don't tell Grandma. While I was busy giving my statement about the shooting, I got a call from Olympus PD. They left a curt message. This is for DCI Lutero Cade. We are calling to inform you that you have been removed as the lead investigator on the Rudder case. You are required to turn your case files over to the Special Magistrate's Office of the OPD and await further instructions. Failure to comply immediately will result in disciplinary measures. We will be in contact if we require anything else from you. When I sent a message saying, "What the hell?" to the number given to me by Oliver Villeneuve, I got an auto-response. The CTO was currently unavailable, but would get back to me at his convenience. So much for no cover-ups. There was no point in fighting it. My command would roll right over, so I sent OPD my files. I told Pi that there was no reason to delay her autopsy report anymore either. I was now officially out of the loop, but I was pissed off, so I went back to work anyway. The ZPD hopper hugged the side of the mountain. The rapplers in the stubby wings were the only thing keeping us from getting dashed against the rocks as our craft was bludgeoned with 100-click wind gusts. My environment suit was padded, but I was still collecting bruises from being slammed back and forth between the seat and safety harness. It's a nice day for flying, the pilot said. Berk wasn't even being sarcastic. This was pleasant by his standards. No lightning strikes or acid plumes today. There's not space to land near that spot you marked, but there's a place you can rope down nearby and walk in. I'll land at Barker Pad until you call for pickup. I appreciate it. Rex say I'm supposed to call it in whenever I drop someone on the surface. I could get in a lot of trouble for this, Cade. I know, Berk. I owe you. Damn right, you do. My coroner worked for ammo. My pilot worked for booze. This is as low as I can go. That's just ahead. Are you sure? There's nothing down here. After the unpleasantness at Grell's, I'd looked up T's place and taken the emergency locator from the environment suit I'd found there. According to it, he'd spent a lot of time at these coordinates a few days ago. This had to be where Rudder had made his big score, I'm sure. If I don't come back, Constable Katanga is in the hospital. Tell him where I went. He'll know what to do with it, if Katanga was smarter than I was. He'd never say a word about any of this to anyone, or he'd sell the coordinates to Omni and probably either get murdered or a bribe big enough to retire on. But I'd leave that choice up to him. The acid clouds were uncomfortably near. While Berk got the hopper about as close to a flat surface as he could, I rechecked my environment suit to make sure it was sealed and my air supply was good. When he turned the green light on, I slid open the door. This part always made me sick to my stomach. The safety line unspooled, I clipped in, and then stepped out into space. Being in the great wide open was weird. That much blue sky was disorienting to those of us raised in the interior. Everybody on this planet has agoraphobia to some extent. A few seconds later, my boots hit ground. I unclipped the line. Berk waited for visual and audio confirmation that I was free before gaining altitude. The rock. Here was pitch black and everything was sharp enough to cut you. My suit was slash-proof, but even then, I'd still have to tread carefully. One bad wind gust could knock me down, and it was steep enough that, if I got to rolling, I might go over the edge of the world. No worries about dying from the impact. I'd melt in the clouds long before my body ever hit the ground. I checked the map in my helmet, picked the direction T had gone, put my head down, and started hiking down. Nobody ever built surface structures this far down. The top of the clouds usually maintained a constant maximum altitude, but we did get the occasional surge where they'd suddenly climb a few hundred meters and then slowly recede. Curious, I checked the record. This area hadn't been bathed in acid in weeks. Well, that was comforting. The wind picked up. I had to stay low, and even then, it felt like I was going to get hurled over the side. It was nerve-wracking. Rudder had gone through the caves with a crook to get here. Chartering a surface hopper would have drawn too much attention, so I reached the spot in a lot less time than it had taken them. This narrow ledge overlooking the clouds was where T must have spent a few hours twiddling his thumbs. I assumed the guide waited while Rudder had gone on to do his secret business without witnesses. The ledge had one hell of a view of the swirling mist. I was wearing a helmet and a breather, but I was so close, I imagined that I could smell the clouds. It smelled like certain doom. The wind died off. It was downright calm for a minute, almost like Croatoan was being helpful for once. Maybe those old gods Villeneuve talked about had appreciated today's blood sacrifice and were blessing my search, because a few minutes later, I found a crack in the ledge leading back into the mountain. There were fresh rock chips around the opening, telling me Rudder had used his tools to widen the opening a bit. It looked just big enough for me to squeeze through. It was an ominous-looking hole. Rudder had found something in there. Someone had killed him because of it. OPD had stonewalled me about the contents of the box. Despite the CTO's promises, Omnic Croatoan had cut me off. Rudder had been a lot more connected than I was, but they'd murdered him anyway, using some kind of weapon that even the coroner of the murder capital of the colony had never seen before. Did I really want to find out what was inside? Of course I did. Villeneuve might have turned his back on me, but he hadn't been wrong about my nature. The razor-sharp edges of the crack frayed the fabric of my suit, but I made it through. It opened up a bit on the other side. I turned my light on and made my way through the narrow tunnel. I had to go sideways to fit. I'd gone from agoraphobia to claustrophobia in seconds. Good times. The tunnel kept going down. I had to be getting close to the cloud level. If there was so much as a crack leading to the outside, I could be descending right into the acid. My suit wouldn't protect me from that nasty caustic shit for very long at all. It was cold, but I was sweating buckets. My helmet display told me that I was breathing too fast. This was the kind of place even the deep miners feared to tread. This was where people say they saw the ghosts of Croatoan. I'd never seen a ghost, didn't want to start now. My suit was picking up slightly elevated radiation levels ahead. Nothing dangerous yet, but it was a good indicator I was going in the right direction. The tunnel was getting wider. I had to jump a small chasm so deep my light couldn't see the bottom, and I was in darkness that preyed on the imagination. And with one wrong step, I'd vanish forever. Too bad Severo Cade hadn't found us a nicer planet to flee to. Way to go, great-great-gramps. After a while, the cramped tunnel opened into a much larger cave. I shined my light up. The roof was 5 meters high. I shined it down and took a reflexive step back as I realized I was standing less than a meter above a swirling acid mist. Fuck. The floor consisted of broken shelves, each one only a few meters wide at most, separated by narrow cracks, filled with deadly fog. I'd have to carefully step over those to continue on. My suit sounded warnings. The air in here was caustic. It was within safety parameters now, but not for long. I should have listened to Borgia and ruled it a suicide, I muttered to myself as I started across the space. The cave curved around a bend. There was a light 20 meters ahead. I blinked, confused. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me and I'd gone crazy as a miner seeing ghosts. But then the light moved, illuminating the rock ahead of it, bobbing, because it was mounted on a helmet. There was someone else down here. They were working on something. They must have seen my light right after I saw theirs, because it suddenly swung my way, blinding. ZPD! Stop! They ran. The armored gloves made my fingers clumsy as I pulled my handgun from the holster on my suit before going after them. They killed their light, so I couldn't see where they'd gone. I had to keep mine on to avoid falling into an acid bath. This part of the cave was confusing. The rock was still mostly black, but there were a lot of embedded crystals that reflected my light in crazy ways. The walls seemed honeycombed with holes with formations that looked almost as if they'd been poured. I got to the place where the stranger had been and froze when I saw what they'd been working on. There was a bomb on the ground. It was a 3-liter canister of mining explosives, extremely potent stuff in action. That much would obliterate this cave and surely cause a collapse. I moved up to get a better look and got struck from behind. I crashed into the wall. The attacker was on me in an instant, swinging a rock pick at my head. As I dodged to the side, the pick narrowly whistled past. I lifted my pistol and fired twice from the hip. The other suit staggered, but then struck me with one fist. The blow cracked my armored visor. That should have been impossible. I stumbled back, trying to get the gun up, but he blocked my wrist. It was like getting hit with a steel pipe. He spun inhumanly fast and kicked me in the chest. I went flying back, landing hard and rolling across the ground. The pistol bounced from my clumsy glove. Gasping, I tried to get up, but there was an intense pain thundering through my chest. It felt like I'd snapped a rib. Desperate, I looked around for my piece. The bad guy started toward me. Rockpick raised to finish the job, but then stopped and put a hand to the 2 bloody bullet holes I'd put in his abdomen as if just realizing he'd gotten tagged. You son of a bitch, you shot me. The indignant voice coming over the suit's intercom wasn't male as I expected. My attacker was a woman. Surprising, considering the strength difference, and I wasn't exactly a slouch in that department either. But no matter how crazy strong she was, the hollow points to the gut had got her attention. You're hit bad. Drop your weapon and surrender. We can still get you medical attention in time. I've got a hopper on standby, but rather than do me the common courtesy of passing out from blood loss like a decent perp should, she laughed. I'll be fine. I'll just grow a new stomach. You've got no idea who you're dealing with, do you, cop? She came over to finish me off, except I'd used that delay to find my gun. I scooped it up and aimed it at her head. Why don't you enlighten me? She stopped and slowly lifted her hands to the surrender position. The pick made a clunk when she dropped it. Easy there, detective. So I take it growing a new brain is a little more of a challenge than a stomach. My chest really hurt, so I wasn't in the mood to screw around. Who are you? She turned her visor transparent so I could see her face. I recognized her immediately because it was a hard face to forget. But what the hell was Villeneuve's secretary doing here? Sophia. That name will do. Despite the 2 gunshot wounds to a very painful area, I knew that from personal experience. She didn't appear to be in any discomfort. Instead, she was eerily calm. You should have walked away when you had the chance. Careful to keep the gun on her, because she'd already demonstrated she was crazy fast, I struggled to my feet. What are you? I'm from Earth. I'm human, just like you, only improved. You mean your ancestors are from Earth? Nobody's that old. You'd be surprised. There's cutting-edge tech in this city that would blow your little mind. You can buy miracles if you've got the money. She gave me a patronizing smile. Regardless, I'm still close enough to human that you should probably feel guilty if you kill me. Don't bet on it. You feel any guilt for killing Rutter? Not at all. The The man was an insufferable pig. I did the world a favor. Why, though, did he betray your boss? Did he find some new higher bidder than Omni for the relics he'd found? That seemed to genuinely amuse her, not even close. I don't actually work for poor old Oliver, with his head always down in the clouds. He actually liked Rudder. No, I work there to spy on him. Omni's CTO keeps tabs on every treasure hunter in Croatoan. Villeneuve is always looking for old tech to buy, if anyone discovers anything unique on this rock, he'd hear, which meant I'd know about it soon after. Only Rudder found something he wasn't supposed to, something that people aren't ready for yet. It's our duty to keep them from it, for their own good. Whose duty? Who do you work for? Oh, detective, don't mind that. We're just observers who only step in when it's absolutely necessary. I kept the gun on her, steady as I could, despite the throbbing fire in my chest. But then I looked past her toward the roof of the cave directly above the bomb, and I noticed for the first time that there were carvings there. Odd symbols and words, only they weren't in any language I'd ever seen. As I stared at them, the symbols seemed to move, to shimmer, black rock shifting into hues of green and purple. Shadows danced in the rock. I blinked, confused. I'd just seen a ghost. I've been watching this little experiment unfold for a long time, detective, so I could tell you'd be trouble from the moment I saw you. The family resemblance is eerie. You remind me of Severo Cade. He didn't know when to stop asking questions either. That was insane. She couldn't have known him. He died a long time ago. That insatiable curiosity was the real reason your ancestor had to go out the airlock. As for you, you'll just disappear in some hole. Sophia had her hands up. But she slowly, unthreateningly began to lower one toward me, and too late. Distracted by her crazy talk and the moving rock behind her, I remembered the bioweapon that had killed Rudder. I pulled the trigger just as the end of Sophia's glove exploded. The angle was odd. Her aim was off. The bone-shard bullet sliced through my arm, but mine went through her helmet. Somehow, Sophia remained standing. She lifted her other hand like she was about to point at me accusingly. I lit her up. The next bone needle cracked the ground at my feet. She stumbled back as I kept firing one-handed. I must have hit her a dozen times before she tumbled over an edge into the acid below. Sophia vanished without a sound. Glancing down, I realized I was bleeding bad. My arm was dangling, useless. Her bioprojectile had struck near my elbow and traveled clear to my shoulder. My bicep had been splayed wide open. The long white shattered mess I was looking at was actually the remains of my humerus. Then my nerves caught up, and the pain hit so strong that I nearly swooned. The suit's emergency system kicked in. A tourniquet automatically tightened around my armpit, and the wound was sealed with medical foam. It's hard to articulate just how much that all hurt. My cracked helmet display was filled with warnings about the toxic air and my dropping blood. Pressure. Thankfully, the walls had quit being weird as soon as I stopped focusing on them. I stumbled over to Sophia's bomb. Bombs could be brain-dead simple or super complicated. What would render one bomb safe would set another one off. Some would detonate as soon as you touched them. ZPD had an actual bomb squad for a reason. The training that the rest of us were given was to get everyone away from them and call the experts who'd form a perimeter and probably send in a bot to defuse it. I didn't know if it was armed or if I'd interrupted her before she could finish setting it. I didn't know if it was on a timer, and if so, how much time I had left. Hopefully, she'd given herself a comfortable window to escape. For all I knew, this wasn't the only bomb she'd placed down here. So I could try to disarm it, one-handed and stupid from blood loss, or I could go for help. I left the bomb behind, took one last confused look at the strange carvings, and then ran for the tunnel. My journey back up was a haze. I could feel the hot blood collecting inside my suit. Breathing hurt. I kept getting weaker and clumsier as my head spun through what I'd just seen. It was a miracle I made it back to the light without falling down a hole. When I got outside, the hoppers were hovering over the ledge, a bunch of OPD officers in heavy exosuits were there. Stenciled on their chests were the words, "Special Magistrate." I had just enough time to warn them that there was a bomb before it went off. A week later, I got discharged from the hospital with a shiny new commendation for bravery from the superintendent and a fancy new arm, courtesy of omnicrotoan. The free arm was their way of thanking me for the way I'd courageously stopped a never-Earth terrorist who was trying to blow up their deep dig project. The official story didn't make a whole lot of sense, but it just needed to sound good in bite-sized chunks on everyone's newsfeed. The cave had collapsed. The special magistrates had no record of finding any mysterious artifact inside Rudder's apartment. The radiation alert had been from a malfunctioning crime scene bot. Malfunctions seemed to happen a lot around this case because the file with the video and audio from my environment suit had somehow gotten corrupted and unreadable too. The official record said that Sophia Prescott had been born a reasonable 29 years ago on Olympus, and her only genetic modifications had been some expensive but commercially available cosmetic upgrades. She had fallen in with an extremist group and gotten a job with omnicrotoan in order to sabotage a member of the cabal. The projectile that had destroyed my arm had never been recovered, and if it had been, surely it wouldn't have been some pneumatically driven bone bullet. Old Earth super soldier tech, Katanga was waiting for me outside Zenith General. From the new stripes on his uniform, I could see he'd gotten promoted to sergeant. They were handing out prizes like it was a game show around here. "Morning, detective." He had two coffees and handed me one. "What's our status, Sergeant? The Rudder case is officially closed." "Yeah, I figured as much. Any fallout with your extended family?" Grell was an asshole and bad at his job. Nobody misses him. The clan bosses probably thought it was a coup, but they gave Kojo a chance. So far, my cousin has been a harder worker and better earner, so their proclamation is that the two of us were just innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. Katanga stopped to lean on a railing. He was already back at work, but from the wince, it was clear that he was still recovering too. "What are you gonna do now? Catch up on my paperwork and wait for the next case in the rotation?" "The rate bodies drop around here. That shouldn't take too long." I tasted the coffee. "Two sugars as directed. Maybe I'd keep Katanga around after all." "You still want this assignment? Can I ask one thing first?" "Go for it. I guess it's more of an observation than a question, so let me know if I'm off base here. But when you showed me your tats, they showed you were an enforcer for what used to be the toughest gang in 5 points. Except when they died out, you had to be only, 16 or 17 years old. Thereabouts, there was a lot of blood on that resume. So I get to thinking, that's probably why you do what you do now. Why you've got the rep you've got. Why you take the risks you do. You're trying to make up for the harm you've done, trying to put things right. You're actually trying to make this world a better place. Albeit in a violent and fucked up kind of way. The kid would make a good detective someday. But then I showed him my new artificial arm scrubbed clean without a mark on it. My old resume was on the way to the recyclers. It was mushroom food now. "I don't know what you're talking about." Katanga was imperturbable. "Guess I imagine the whole thing. Yeah, there's a lot of that going around lately. You want the job or not? I worked for you less than 48 hours before getting stabbed." "Sure, why not? That's the spirit, Katanga. See you Monday morning." There was one final development in the strange case of Devin Rudder. A few months after I went back to work, somebody left a package on my desk. Nobody saw who had delivered it. There were 2 things inside: a disposable datapad and a notebook. And by notebook, I mean a literal old-fashioned, made out of real paper, like from actual trees notebook. It had to be ancient. The pages were filled with handwritten records. The front cover said that this personal logbook was the property of Chief Navigator Severo Cade, CS New Beginning. The datapad automatically unlocked when it saw my face. A few lines appeared, just long enough for me to read them before. The pad deleted the message and erased its memory. The message read, "The gate did not send us here by accident. We were offered up. When the old gods demanded sacrifice, Earth gave them us. Good luck, detective."